Understanding WAN edge devices in the SD-WAN infrastructure can be kind of daunting. There's C-edges, there's vEdges, there's virtual, there's physical. And did you know that there's a hard way to do it and an easy way to do it? And I'm going to show you both, and we're going to start right now. Cisco SD-WAN depends heavily on the idea of the control plane mechanism that we did in the previous video, and it also is going to draw heavily on the ability, features, and capabilities that the routers that we use to move data bring to the environment. Now, specifically, when it comes to looking at SD-WAN, we have these devices. And like I said, these devices come in many different shapes and forms. Specifically, they're based on the architecture of the vEdge devices, which are Viptela architecture devices or built devices, as well as the newer Cisco devices. These devices are based on infrastructures like the CSR1000V, the ISR in the physical environment, the ISRV in the virtualized environment, as well as the newer devices that are coming out, which are going to be the Cisco Catalyst 8300s, as well as the virtual Catalyst 8000V. We're going to take a look at each of those in this self-paced boot camp in order to be able to get a firm understanding of what actually takes place as it relates to the deployment of these devices in our infrastructure. Now, keep in mind, these WAN devices are designed to be able to provide lots of information to the controllers in the form of the performance characteristics that we're going to have. That's going to be related to things like bidirectional forwarding detection. They're going to be designed to communicate their routes and information to those vSmarts. Remember, I described those vSmarts as working like route reflectors, and we're going to talk about the Overlay Management Protocol, or OMP protocol, because it's going to be very, very important for us moving forward. It's also going to be these devices that are actually going to be running routing protocols. We can run routing protocols towards VPN 0, which is going to be towards the fabric. So in other words, we could be actually running BGP, for instance, with our service provider. But more often than not, in deployments, as far as in classes like this one, we're going to be focusing on running these routing protocols in our service-side VPNs. In other words, we're going to be running OSPF, EIGRP, where we have the Cisco-capable devices, as well as BGP and any other features. As an example, perfect comment here, not a routing protocol, but a first hop redundancy protocol, VRRP, is going to be supported and be running on these edge devices. So please keep in mind, there's going to be a lot of stuff that we're going to have to talk about, and we're also going to want to look at these in terms of individual devices and resources. And also bear in mind, I promised that we would discuss the hard way and the easy way. Concepts like zero-touch provisioning and things like that makes our lives a little bit simpler. However, keep in mind, in labs, we still have to build these resources. Remember that we have a ZTP server, a zero-touch provisioning server. We're actually going to configure that, and we're going to use it in the first portion of this video as we look at the vEdge devices. But keep in mind, ZTP is only supported in vEdge. We have other solutions that are going to be available to us, and we're going to look at, like I said, the hard way and the easy way moving forward in the rest of this video. All right, the first thing I want to do is call our attention to the user environment. Now, in the last video, we set up all of the controllers. And if you have not watched that video, I highly recommend that you go ahead and click on the card at the top of this video on the right-hand side so that you can actually watch that video. Go ahead and just stop this one, pause it. You can always come back and watch that video, because that's going to be the video that we used to go through how we actually built our infrastructure. So you see across the top here, we have the 3 vMange, the 2 vBonds, and the 3 vSmarts that we're actually employing in this environment. And those devices are infinitely important for us before we can even really begin to build the fabric, because they represent the control plane, the management plane, as well as the orchestration plane resources that we discussed in the previous video. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hit the rest of this. Now, the main thing I want to call your attention to is you'll notice here we have WAN Edge inventory on the screen, and we see that we have a total number of devices authorized, deployed, and staging, and we have all zeros here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go through the steps necessary to actually tell the vMange what devices I intend to support. Now, the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to go to the configuration, I'm going to go to devices, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to say upload WAN edge list. Now, I have already gone through the steps necessary to build this list. If you want me to give you guys a video on how that's done, just let me know in the comments, and what I'll do is I'll actually set up a video just for that so that you guys can get an idea of what's involved in getting your own license file. Now, the license file that I currently have on my environment is going to be saved on my desktop. Actually, it's going to be saved in my downloads folder, and it's called sd-wan csr vEdge cat serial file.viptela. That's because what I did is I uploaded everything into this file that's going to allow me to be able to do demonstration on all of the resources that we were discussing at the beginning of the video. Now, that does not take into account the physical resources. Just understand that they will have to be provisioned differently. So right now, let's just put a pin on that and let's go ahead and move forward with getting the virtual devices installed. Now, what I've got is I've got the license file, and my recommendation to everyone is to go ahead and select validate the uploaded vEdge list and send to controllers. Now, the reason I'm saying this is that if you don't do this now, you're going to have to manually do every device independently when it comes time to actually configure these resources, and that's going to take a lot of time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and hit upload, and it's going to ask me if I'm sure I want to upload this, and I'm going to go ahead and say okay. And what this is going to do is this is actually going to read the contents of that file. It's going to find 32 devices, and by hitting OK, what I'm doing is I'm agreeing to configuring these devices, and what's happening now is these resources are actually being added to the controllers. Notice my 3V Smarts, my 3V Manage, my 2V Bonds. And this is necessary because these resources have to know about the devices that I have actually paid for and licensed through Cisco before I can actually begin adding resources to the fabric that we're trying to build. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Devices, and from Devices, what I'm going to do is I should be able to see a list of resources. Now what I like to do is I like to go ahead and sort this based on device model. So I do that by clicking on the device model, and what we're going to see here is that I have a different set of devices, and I'm going to go ahead and list those. You'll notice that I have, if I scroll up to the top, I have 8 vEdges, I have 8 ISRVs, I have 8 CSR 1000 Vs, and I also have 8 CAT 8000 Vs. Now, this is going to give us a lot of flexibility. Understand that when it really boils down to it, there are two principal modes of configuration. There's the vEdge devices, which take the vEdge syntax. And then there's the Cisco devices, which take the Cisco IOS XE SD-WAN syntax to make the configurations. And there are going to be some little tricks that we're going to discuss moving forward. So please stick with me as I go through and explain all of the different steps. And remember, I promised the hard way and the easy way. We're going to begin using a vEdge configuration. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it the hard way, or the harder way. There's nothing really hard about it. Just understand that if I don't automate using a vEdge, I have to manually configure every device step by step, just like we did with the controllers. So let's take a look at that and see what it looks like when we get into the next part of this, which is going to be accessing our first vEdge device. All right, let's go ahead and see if we can't get this thing going. My first vEdge that I'm going to bring online is going to be Data Center vEdge 1. Now, what I want to call your attention to is you'll notice that there are going to be some blue routers and there are going to be green routers. The blue routers are Viptela devices, specifically vEdge Cloud Service Routers. The green devices are going to be CSR 1000V running the latest and greatest version of that operating system. And we'll explore that as we continue to move forward. But what I want to do right now is I want to begin with vEdge 1. And from the perspective of setting up vEdge 1, there are going to be some things that I'm going to want to make certain that we configure. First of all, it's never been deployed or activated on the network. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and log into it and change the password. Change is probably not the best way to say it because I'm going to take it back to admin. Now what I'm going to do is just like we did with the other devices, I'm going to go ahead and say config and set the system configurations up. And it's going to be very similar to what we did with the controllers. So the 5 key pieces of information that I'm going to need is going to be the host name. And again, I'm going to go ahead and take the host name, which is going to be DC vEdge 1. My system IP address is going to be 172.255. The site ID in the third octet, so this is going to be site ID 1, and I'll just go ahead and put the .2 in there. So in this particular situation, I now have a unique system IP address. And keep in mind, the system IP address is kind of like a router ID in OSPF. It's just a way of uniquely identifying the device. It's not going to be routable. It's not going to be reachable. In fact, quite frankly, we're not even allowed to use it on a physical interface inside of the infrastructure as long as it's associated to VPN 0. So now if we proceed with the rest of the configuration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and assign the organizational name. The organizational name is going to be sd-wan-adv-lab, and the identity of my site designation, which is going to be site ID, in this instance, 1, and lastly, the vBond. So we will go ahead and identify the vBond. Will be vBond.micronicslab.com. Now what we're going to do is we're going to need to move to VPN 0. Now VPN 0 is actually going to encompass 2 separate interfaces. Now what I'm going to do is just right now, for the very beginning of this, I'm going to put in the basics. So I'm going to go to VPN 0. And what I'm going to do under VPN 0 is I'm going to assign interface gigabit Ethernet 00, and I'm going to give it an IP address. That IP address is going to be 100.100.100.10/24, and I'll simply say no shut. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and assign the second interface, which will ultimately be part of my MPLS transit network. In this case, I'm going to do 192.0.2.2/30. Again, I'm taking the IP addresses from the configurations that we have set up here. And what I want to do, well, that was silly. So I'll say no interface, and I'm just going to grab this. This is a good example of what the Viptela devices will allow you to do, because, I mean, there is no such thing as interface such and such as far as the IP address. But what I do want to do is now I'm going to say interface gigabit Ethernet 1, and then I'll assign the IP address here, which is going to be 192.0.22/30. So it's 192.0.22/30. Yes, that's the IP address. I will say no shut. Exit. Now what I want to do now is provide my routing configuration as far as reachable destinations. So first I'm going to say IP route. Anything that matches quad 0 is going to go to 100.100.100.1. Now, obviously, that's going to be for the IP address on the internet gateway. But also what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and put in another route to the 192 prefix. And this device right here is going to be on MPLS. I'm just going to go ahead and show you what I've done here. So I'm going to go to MPLS, and I want to look at that interface. So what we will do is in show run interface gigabit 00, since that's the interface on the other side. And we see here that the IP address is 1. In fact, if we take a look at this configuration and I type show IP interface brief, what we'll see is that the IP address is always going to be the lower of the 2 numbers. So if we take a look at gigabit 00, it's 10 on the vEdge 21, and then up here on this device on gigabit 2, what we're going to see is it's going to be 9. So that's the theme that I kept inside of the infrastructure. So the lower number is always going to be the number that's going to be on the router. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to say .1. Sorry, need to put the default route in first. So it's going to be 0.0.0.0/0 192.0.2.1. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify the DNS server. So the DNS server is going to be 172.16.100.100. And I will say commit and quit. Now, if all goes well, I should have reachability to my respective gateway. So 100.100.100.1, and I got the reachability there, and I'll say ping 192.0.2.1 to ping the gateway of last resort on MPLS itself. And lastly, what I want to do is ping www.google.com. We've got DNS resolution, and then the next thing I'm going to do is ping 100.100.100.2, and let's see if I can hit the IP address of the vMange 1 in my cluster. So according to this, I have all of the reachability that I could want in order to be able to begin onboarding this device. Now, like I said, I call this the hard way, probably more accurately the long way, but the object of the exercise here is looking at this device. The goal is going to be to get it to be part of my fabric. Now, in order to be able to do that, there's some things that we need to explore. First of all, just like controllers, I need to have my root certificate. So let's go ahead and see if we can't get that transferred. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to go into my jump box. From my jump box, I'm going to go to my CLI, and from the CLI, I'm going to say SCP admin. Actually, we'll say the file I want to SCP first, sd-wan.pim, and I'm going to send it to admin at 100.100.100. And if you remember correctly, when we take a look at that device, we gave that device show interface description. We gave this device a 4th octet of 10. So that's going to be where I'm going to send this. So I'm going to say .10, and let's see if we can get it to transfer. Now, notice that the file is not moving. Now, I want to talk about why the file's not moving. Remember, we had that issue with the vBond, and when we were looking at building the vBond did not allow us to be able to do anything as far as connecting to it because the tunnel was on by default. So what's happening in this particular instance, we're actually blocking this access. Now, I've got two courses of action that I could take here. I could either turn the tunnel off, which is on by default, or I could go ahead and just enable this process. Now, to enable the process, that's going to be the path of least resistance. So let's see if we can't actually do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to return to my device. And from my device, again, I'm going to go into config. I'm going to go into VPN 0, and I'm going to say interface, gigabit Ethernet, and I want to go to 00, which is going to be the internet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say tunnel interface, and I'm going to say allow service. And if I do a question mark here, one of the services that I can allow is going to be SSHD, SSH daemon. And I'll say commit and quit. Now, at first blush, everybody thinks that this should immediately start working. Well, the problem is it's not, because what we're going to do now is we're going to verify it by retesting. And now what's going to happen is because we've reinitiated the handshake, what's going on is that we're now allowing the communication to actually go through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say yes. I'm going to use the password of admin. And as you can see, I just transferred this file. So this is going to be very important for us to keep in mind, because these devices and these resources need to make certain, and we need to verify that they each have their appropriate root CAs. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the device, and I'm going to verify what it says when I use the command show control local properties. And what we're going to see here is that, remember, it says that the root CA is installed. But I want to look at the nature of that root CA. I'm going to say show certificate root CA cert pipe include SD-WAN. And what we're going to see is that there is nothing configured here. So what I want to do is I want to apply the root CA, and that's going to be done through the request root certificate chain install into the home admin sd-wan.pim, and that's actually going to apply it. Then what I'm going to do is repeat the show command, and we should see that we actually do see the Micronics configuration here. And as a result of that, that means that this device is going to be ready to have its CSR signed. Now, that process actually happens differently in a vEdge. And again, we're taking the long way here. And the long way is going to be that we're going to handle everything manually. I'm going to move to the jump box. And from the jump box, I want to look at vEdge devices. And what you're going to see here is we have a chassis number and we have a token number. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the chassis number. I'm just going to double click on it, highlight it, and copy it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to my CLI here. And what I'm going to do is so that I can copy and paste in the lab, I'm going to do a SSH admin at 100, 100, 100.10 and see if it lets me log in admin. And sure enough, it does. Now you see, based on the prompt, I am located or sitting on DC vEdge 1. Now, what I want to do at this particular juncture is I'm going to utilize another request command. I'm going to say request, and it's going to be vEdge Cloud activate chassis. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste that chassis number in. I'm going to hit space, and then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to provide it the token number, and that token number is also going to be available here. And what I want to do is I want to capture the token number. Let me go ahead and drag this over just a little bit so that we can see how long this is. And I want to get it without the keyword token. So I'm going to right click, say copy, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into the CLI. I'm going to right click and say paste, and then I'm going to hit enter. Now, as a result of this, my hope is that this device is actually going to connect to the vMange and add itself to my inventory. Now, right now, keep in mind that this device is going to take a little bit of time. So I'm going to just kind of pause and wait for it to actually connect. All right, we see right now that the device has, notice it's got a little green circle around it that says CSR. Well, that CSR is the certificate request or the certificate signature request. And if it successfully gets signed, what we're going to see is it's going to actually translate to this little green ribbon. And the green ribbon means that this device has been successfully added to my infrastructure. You can see here that the serial number has translated from a token to an actual software configured serial number. And what we're going to also see is that this, if we go to our main console, what we should see is that we should see a device that is in the process of being added to our infrastructure. Now, notice here it shows up as red. Now, if I click on the control plane down, what we're going to see here is notice it's telling me that this device is unreachable. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to, again, wait for a little while to see if this condition actually continues. Notice that the device has gone green here, but it still shows as control plane down here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this, and what we're going to find is this is empty. Now, what I'm doing is I'm trying to make you guys aware of the fact that these graphical user interfaces are not instantaneous. And as a direct result of their lack of instantaneous refresh, you can see some things that might initially kind of look oddball. So again, take everything that you see with a grain of salt as it relates to how these resources go active. But we can see above my head here, we actually have a WAN Edge device that has been successfully onboarded. Now, before I move on and start talking about the next part of this, which is going to be using the ZTP server, what I want to do is I want to take another look at also the WAN Edge inventory. Remember, I uploaded a file that had 32 WAN Edge devices? Well, as a result of the fact that I authorized those at the time that I added the Viptela license file, we can see that I have all 32 that are going to be considered to be authorized, and that's the total number of devices. And also of these, notice now that I have one device that has been deployed, and we can see that I'm going to be able to look at its health score and other elements. Now, obviously, this is going to be something that we're going to look at closer as we move into our configuration. Right now, my primary focus is going to be to build the infrastructure, to get the control planes operational like we did in the last video, bring up our WAN Edge devices, whether they're cEdge, whether they're going to be vEdge, and ultimately get to the point to where we can actually start creating VPNs, moving data, and verifying how things are actually going to be translated inside of the VPN0 infrastructure using internet and MPLS. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go in and I'm going to turn on DC vEdge 2. DC vEdge 2 is going to actually get an IP address from the gateway router. I have enabled DHCP on this device, and I'll go ahead and give you guys an illustration of what that looks like. I'll say show run pipe section DHCP, and what we're going to see here is this resource is providing the following information. So you can copy that into your own lab if you're following along. And then also it should be noted that if I come in and say show run include IP host, what we're going to see is that we have an entry for our 2 vBonds, as well as an entry for a resource called ztp.viptela.com. Now, what I want to do right now is just simply go through the configuration. So I'm going to go into DC vEdge 2. And from DC vEdge 2, I'm going to log in. And since this is a first-time start, it'll be admin, admin, and change it to what it was. There we go. So, show, interface, description, and we can see that I got a IP address from this DHCP server. So show IP DHCP binding, we'll see that that IP address was issued to this MAC address D0001. If I want to look at that over here, show interface gigabit Ethernet 00, we can see that it is D0001. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to actually see if we can't get this device to actually join our fabric. Now, the issue that we have is going to be that this device does not have the proper root CA. Remember, we need to use the root CA that we built. I can illustrate that by saying show certificate root CA pipe include, and I'll say sd-wan, and we'll see that there's nothing there. If I come over here and say Viptela, so if I just up arrow and say show me Viptela, we'll see that it's not going to show up here, but let's say show cert. You can see that we do have certificates. Let me see, it's probably capital V if I wasn't paying attention. So yeah, it's capital V. So if I were to come over here and say show cert pipe include Viptela, we should actually see that here we do have their Viptela certificate. Now remember, this comes on this virtual box. This is just a vEdge. Now what I want to do is I want to actually use my own, but the problem is remember when we said show run VPN0, remember our interfaces by default on a vEdge are actually going to be functioning with the tunnel mode on and encapsulation IPsec. Now I don't want to change that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to say configure, and I'm going to go to VPN0 interface gigabit Ethernet 00. I'm going to go into the tunnel interface and I'm just going to say allow services or allow service all, and I'll say commit and quit. Now I should be able to do pretty much whatever I want. And what I want to do is I want to transfer the file from the jump box to the device in question. So all I'm going to do is actually, I need to remove my host files just in case. I've been doing some experimenting on in the background between sessions. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say scp sd-wan.pim to admin at 100.100.100.79 : and it should let me log in. Admin should allow me to be able to pass the data. So all I want to do now is go to that resource and enable this. Now I'm going to do some copy and paste. So that means I'm going to want to use the CLI. So I'm going to simply say SSH to admin at 100.100.100, and I'm going to say 79. Log in, and sure enough, here I am on the console of the vEdge itself. Now all I want at this joint is going to be to request root cert chain install the file that I moved to home/admin called sd-wan.pim. You've seen me do this a number of times. And now if I verify show certificate, root CA certificate, and I say pipe include SD-WAN, you'll see that indeed I have mine in there. Now, it does not mean, if I come over here and say Viptela, does not mean that the Viptela one remains. So in this specific instance, what I've done is I've replaced theirs with ours. Now that this is installed, what I want to do next is I want to go ahead and onboard this device. Now, how am I going to do that? Well, what I'm going to do is I want to first of all show control connections. And we'll see we have none. Now I'm going to say show control, not clear control connections history. And then I'm going to say show control connections history. And we'll see that that is now empty. Now, I want that to be empty in case we have to do any troubleshooting. Now, the next part of this is going to be to go ahead and do the request vEdge cloud activate chassis command. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the user interface and I'm going to grab the next available vEdge device. Remember, you can hit the device model 2 times and it'll actually move all of the vEdges to the top. They would normally be at the bottom. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the chassis number and I'm going to paste that in to my session. Paste. Then I'm going to say token. And then what I'm going to do is go back to the graphical user interface and grab the token. Remember, do not take the token keyword. Copy. And then I'm going to paste that in. And I'm going to hit enter. Now, I'm going to come in and say show control connections. And what we're going to see is that we have formed a communication towards our vBond 100.100.100.3. That's the IP address of vBond 1. And you'll notice here we're sending a communication or have sent a communication to 100.100.12, which is going to be our second vMange in our vMange cluster. Now what I want to do is let's go ahead and see if we actually are going to see anything in the output of show connections history, because remember I cleared that, and now what we're seeing is that we do have some configuration in place. So we've got system IP change, system IP change, system IP change. We have some other outputs here, and what I want to know is this device actually being onboarded? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the graphical user interface, and sure enough, we see that it has been onboarded. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the main dashboard, and from the main dashboard, I want to see what's going on. Now notice, I have a device, and it says its control plane is currently down. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to that device, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit enter here, and what we're going to find is that this unit is actually being configured by the vMange. It's not broken. Notice here, it now no longer says control plane down or control down, and we still have a red arrow here. But remember, like I said, these graphical user interfaces are not instantaneous, and before I even hit refresh, it actually changed itself to an up state. Now, what's more interesting is not only did it change itself to an up state, if I hit enter now, what we're going to find is it actually has been configured and programmed by the vMange. Now, this is what we call the short method. Now, or the easy way of onboarding vEdge devices. Now, this is going to have to be caveated because you've got to understand that in the context of Viptela, back in the day, Viptela used to host the ZTP.viptela.com servers, and there was a cluster of servers, and when you or I would buy resources, they would actually populate all of that information to that zero-touch provisioning server, which they actually hosted in their environment. We would pay for licenses, we would connect to that. the devices would actually see the tokens and the serials or the TPMs, all of the cryptographic ASICs and physical hardware, and then it would allow us to be able to onboard devices in a very similar fashion to what you see here. But the problem with this is that it's sorcery, or at least it looks like sorcery, but it's not. All right. In fact, it's an illusion. What's happening here is that we have created our own ZTP server. Now, Cisco does not host ZTP servers. Cisco changed the methodology to what is referred to as a PNP service, or a plug-and-play service. Now, this actually translates to the fact that our behavior is going to be exactly the way it used to be, but now the responsibility of building this server, this zero-touch provisioning server, falls on our shoulders. Now, what I've done is I've illustrated the fact that this works, and I want to highlight the fact that, sure enough, if I come in here and I say show control connections, what we're going to see here is that we should have connections with our vSmarts and our vMange. So everything is good to go in that regard. I can even come in here and say show OMP peers. We haven't covered this yet, but you can see that I have peerings with two of the vSmart, vSmart 1 and vSmart 2. In this specific instance, out of the three that we have. So bear in mind, like I said, this is almost like magic when it comes to what's actually happening or the appearance of what's happening. However, in labs and even in production, since this ZTP server doesn't exist as an entity outside of Cisco, because Cisco acquired everything and set up their own methodology using SD-WAN, this is something that we have to do on our own. And I'd be remiss if I didn't show you how to actually implement it in your environments. And that's what we're going to talk about next. We're going to actually move to a conversation about zero-touch provisioning and ZTP servers. And I'm going to remove all of the configuration that I have set up in here to allow this ZTP to work. So I'm going to go up to the ZTP server itself. I'm going to wipe it, which is going to ultimately remove all of its configuration. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the jump box, and from the jump box, what I want to do is remove the ZTP as a resource. So we'll log in, test 1, 2, 3. Now, to facilitate the mechanism of ZTP, what I've done is I went into my system and I added it as a controller. So if I go to controllers, under devices, what we'll see here is the device in question is this guy right here, vBond. It's not really going to be functioning as a vBond per se, because it's not inside of the DNS resolution that I showed you earlier. But what I want to do right now is I'm going to invalidate this controller. And that's going to remove it from the list of controllers that I'm going to be supporting. And it's going to take it a little bit of time to basically be removed. Now, while this is happening, what I want to do is I'm going to minimize this, and I'm going to go ahead and turn the ZTP back on. And what we're going to do is we're going to want to make some configurations on this device to, first of all, get it to where we can onboard it in the fabric. The rationale behind onboarding it has more to do with the fact that I want it to have a functional set of certificates. So it must be configured such that it's going to be able to handle the processing of our organizational name, the generation of the CSR, the signature of a CSR, and everything. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us from soup to nuts as far as getting this thing set up. Now, in order to be able to do that, I want to connect to it. So I'll just double click, and we'll find ourselves looking at a vEdge. Because at the end of the day, all a ZTP server is a vBond. So I'm going to come in here and say admin, 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 admin. And remember, all a vBond is a vEdge. It's been told that it's going to assume the role of a vBond. So let's make certain that I want to see if the machine has been removed. So if I go in and take a look at devices, I should now be able to go to controllers, and I should only be able to see two of those vBonds. So yes, Everything's ready for us right now. So what that translates to is that I want to go in and do the configuration in such a way that we're going to set this device up. We're going to onboard it just like it was a vBond. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make the configuration necessary to go ahead and onboard another device. The device that I'm going to onboard is going to be vEdge 30. So right now, what that's going to translate to is we need to do the config. And I'm going to go ahead and set up the system parameters. So in this instance, it's going to be host-name. And what we're going to do is we're going to call this ZTP. I need a system IP address. So what we'll do is we'll say 172.255. I'm going to go ahead and say 100, and then I will use 101 as the 4th octet. Again, it just needs to be unique. Next thing that I'm going to do is tell it the organizational name, which is going to be sd-wan-adv-lab. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to give it a site ID. And I'm going to go ahead and make this part of a site ID 1003. Just an arbitrary value. And I need to tell it the identity of the vBond. Well, guess what? It is a vBond. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, we will use your IP address as the vBond. And you'll notice here I can say, hey, the local device is going to be the vBond. And it's also going to require me to employ this little guy right here, ZTP-server. So now I've got everything that I need in the system to make this device be able to be ready to be joined to the fabric. So what we're going to do now is VPN 0. I'm going to need that default route, IP route, which will be 100.100.100.1. Then I'm going to need the DNS, which is going to be 172.16.100.100. And I'm going to go to interface gigabit Ethernet 00, and I'm going to assign it its IP address. IP address 100.100.100.101/24. No shut. I'm going to say tunnel interface. And from here, I'll say encapsulation IPsec. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm also going to say allow services or allow service all. And we will say commit and quit. Now, obviously, in order to be able to onboard this device, I need to make certain that I have the sd-wan.pem file. So we'll go back to the jump box. And what I'm going to do is I'll go to the CLI. And then from here, I'll go ahead and exit out of this guy right here. Actually, I can't because this has since ended. So we'll go ahead and say close that terminal. And we'll use this one. So again, I'm going to say scp sd-wan.pem. And what we're going to do is we're going to transfer this to admin at 100.100.101:, and admin should let me in, and now it's there. So the only thing that we really need to do at this juncture is to go ahead and enable the root certificate. So that's going to be the request root certificate chain install home admin sd-wan. All right, so now we're ready to go through the onboarding process. So that means I need to generate a CSR. To generate a CSR, I have to add it as a device. And I'm going to go ahead and sign that CSR on the local machine. So let's go ahead and see if we can't get that to happen. And to get that to happen, I'm going to start from the vMange. I'm going to go to configuration, to devices. I'm going to go to controllers. From controllers, I'm going to say add a controller, and I'm going to go ahead and add a vBond. And I'm going to use the IP address of 100.100.100.101, and I'm going to say do not generate the CSR, same as we did in the other labs, and then I'm waiting for this to be added, and you can see here that it's currently not installed. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go to certificates. From certificates, I'm going to go to controllers, and we will see here that I have this guy right here that says vBond, and we see it's got a UUID and no cert installed. All this is telling me is that this device has been part of the fabric before. And what I want to do is I actually want to add it back. Remember, we deleted it. So I'm going to go over to the three dots, and from the three dots, I'm going to generate a CSR. I'm going to save said CSR. And then what we're going to do is we're going to close, and I'm going to go into the system, and I need to do a little bit of house cleaning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say remove -F, and I'm going to remove anything that is ZTP dot anything else. Now I'm going to move undefined, which is going to be the .csr file that we're going to get from any device that's not part of or a vMange in our environment. And I'm going to call this ztp.csr. And what I want to do now is I actually want to sign this. So we are going to say open SSL X509 REQ-N. And the in file is going to be the ztp.csr. And what we are going to do is the CA is going to be sd-wan.pim. The CA key is going to end up being the sd-wan.key. Then what we're going to do is we are going to do the CA serial or create serial. And then what we're going to do is here I'm going to say out, and the output file is going to be ztp.crt, and I'm going to say I want this to last for 2,000 days, plural, and I want to use SHA-256, and let's see if this actually goes through, and it appears to. So let's go ahead and cat it, and we'll copy it and then get it into the system through the install certificate. So let's go ahead and grab all of it, copy, go back into the graphical user interface, and I'm going to hit install certificate, and I'm going to go ahead and say paste, and let's see if we can get this thing to install. All right, we see that it's been installed. Now, the next part of this is going to involve going in and making certain that this resource is going to be able to be reachable. In other words, I want to be able to resolve its name. I want to make certain that I can ping it from the different devices. And we also want to make certain that we pay attention to what's happening, because remember, we're going to add site 30 to the mix. Let's go ahead and take a look at what that's going to appear like from the perspective of the devices. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and minimize. And I want to go to, I'll go ahead and minimize this also. I'm going to take a look at this guy right here. Now this guy right here is vEdge 30, and I want to log into vEdge 30, admin. And from vEdge 30's perspective, I want to say show interface description, and I want to make certain or see if this device actually has an IP address, and it has an IP address of 80. Now what I want to do is I want to leverage the ability to be able to set this device up and utilize this device for the purposes of working on and doing some testing. This device is going to allow us to be able to exercise and determine whether or not the ZTP server is actually doing its job. But what I want to do to the ZTP server in the beginning part of this is what I want to do is I'm actually going to, first of all, make certain that the ZTP server can hit the outside world. It can hit the gateway. Can it ping 8.8.8.8? It can ping through. Can it ping www.google.com? It can. Can it ping itself as a DNS? So I'll say, we'll come over here and say ping vbond.micronicslab.com. It should resolve to its own IP address and it should work. So from the perspective of the ZTP, everything seems to be good to go. Now, what I want to do is I want to do some additional testing. So I'm going to enter the vShell. So from vShell, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change directory to var log, and I'm going to go to temp log. And from here, I'm going to use a Linux command called tail-f vdebug. And what we're going to see here is the the ZTP server is going to be processing messages. And on this screen, what we're going to see is we're going to have the ability of being able to monitor how the ZTP server is actually going to process incoming information. This could be done on a vBond. All of that information is going to be saved in the vdebug file, and by tailing it, what we're doing is we're actually looking at the last lines that are being entered into this file as they actually get entered into the file. So what I want to do is I want to take a look at this now, and I'm going to leave this thing running up here. I'm going to go ahead, and one of the things that I want to do is I want to not have to use this console right here. I don't want to have to use vEdge 30. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I am going to go into the jump box. I'm going to change the size of the jump box to where I can actually have both of these screens up at the same time. And you'll notice I hit enter over here on the ZTP server just to make certain that everything's clear. Now, we're going to kind of go through this in a painful way, because I want you guys to understand all of the nuance and all of the configurational requirements in order to actually get this to work. Now, first and foremost, like I said, we're going to use this device right here, which is going to be our Site 30. I think I said Site 40. So this is going to be our Site 30, and it's going to be at 80. Now, bear in mind, we know that I need to be able to get the SD-WAN PIM sent over, so I'm going to go ahead and take care of that now. So it's going to be SCP SD-WAN.PIM. We're going to send it to admin at 100.100.100.80. And it doesn't seem to be letting me in. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what's going on. So we know the leading cause of this is the fact that we do not have a SSH daemon service that's being allowed. So what I'll do is I'll say config. We'll go to VPN 0. We'll go to interface gigabit Ethernet 00. I'll say tunnel interface, and I'll say allow service all, and commit and quit. Okay, so now if I stop this process by using a Control-C and reinstate the process, it should actually allow me to connect now. Admin should be able to transfer the file with absolutely no problems. So now I've got it. I want to go ahead and get it installed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say request root certificate chain install home admin sd-wan.pim, and that file has now actually been added to my infrastructure. The thing that we want to remember here is that what we want to do is we need to pick a device that we have actually been issued permission by Cisco to use. And again, that's going to be in the configuration devices WAN Edge list. And if I go ahead and hit my device model here a couple of times to where I can get the vEdges up in the top, we see here that we have the third device. Now, destroying the ZTP server did absolutely nothing to the existing device that we onboarded previously using the ZTP server, because once the ZTP server it's done its job, we don't need it anymore. It's just a initial reference that we're going to actually leverage in order to be able to onboard devices. Once they're onboarded, we're fine. Configuration was pushed by the vMange, and in this demonstration, we're going to look at how and why. So when I look at what's going on now, what I want to do is everything that I did similar to setting the device up before, and that's going to require me to actually SSH over to it, because I want to do copy paste. So I'm going to say SSH to admin 100.100.100.80 admin. And now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and do the request. Actually, let's verify that we have everything that we need. So show interface brief, show interface description. We have an IP address. Let's double check and make sure that we can ping all the necessary resources. So the very first one that we have to hit is the ztp.viptela google.com. Let's see if we can hit that. And we can. It resolves to 100.100.100.101. Ping. I just want to test to the outside world, www.google.com. If that resolves, we know pretty much everything else is working. So at this particular juncture, we have everything that we need. So what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and use my request. And what I want to do is I'm going to say request vEdge Cloud, activate the chassis, and I want to plug that chassis number in, and that's going to be this one right here. I'm just going to capture it, copy, and plug it in. Paste. We'll do token. I'll go ahead and grab the token. Remember, do not grab the keyword token. You just want the numbers and letters. Copy. We come over here. I'll paste that in. And now I have everything that we did before. We've got the root certificate, and we have the configurations here. And what I want you to notice is that immediately we got some messages over here. Now, what I want you to see here is it says vBOM process challenge acknowledgement. We are going to say peer device with a chassis number. That's the peer's device number. And it says it's not found. And what we're going to see here is we're getting an error that says the serial number is not present for the device located at 100.100.100.80. And this is extremely important for us because this is going to tell us what we need to focus on next. Now, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and say show control, and what I want to do is I want to look at connections, and what we're going to see here is there are none. Now, what happens is remember, a device that uses a ZTP server, you know, your theory, too long didn't read, that device is going to go out towards the ZTP server. It's going to be authenticated. If it's authenticated, if it has been whitelisted, then it's going to be told the identity of the actual organizational vBond, and it's going to try to connect to it. Right now, we see none of these connections as up and operational. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to say show control connections history. And what we're going to find here is that we see the exact same message that we're seeing here. Serial number not present. Now, if I haven't configured the ZTP server to recognize the serial number as being one of mine and part of my organization, stands to reason that this isn't going to work. Now, it's also going to be very, very important for us to recognize another fact that we really haven't spent any time talking about. We're going to discuss it in depth when we get into the concept of templates. But if I'm going to use a ZTP server, it is mandatory that I have a template. The vMange has to have a template in order to be able to configure the device that you're going to see on the screen here. And that is going to be what happened in the previous lab, because in that lab, we saw specifically that we had this configuration that was pushed by the vMange down towards the DC vEdge 2 device. I want to do the exact same thing in Site 30 here, and in order to be able to do that, we need to actually build a template. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a very simple CLI template, and that CLI template is going to be what we're going to be using moving forward as we actually work with the rest of this. But you can constantly see the message that we have here is telling us that this device can't be authenticated because the serial number is not present in the ZTP server. What we've got to do is we've got to provide that information. But first, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to implement the template. Now, I'm going to leave all of this running. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the device in question, and we want to actually, I grabbed this one, so darn it. But that's okay. It'll just be out of order. So just to double check, the serial number is 6CD, so 6CD. So I actually grabbed the fourth one, but it's not a problem. This is just going to be the one we use. So 6CD. We need to remember that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to go to a section that we haven't talked about called templates. Now, templates is where I can actually store configurations for devices in the SD-WAN fabric. And you can see here I've already got one. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go ahead and call it site, we'll say branch 30 vEdge 1. I'll copy this and put it here. And I'm going to go ahead and copy it. Now what I want to do, now that it's copied, I want to edit it because there's going to need to be some changes made to it. So we're going to hit edit. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the informational changes that I'm going to need in order to make this work. I'm just going to minimize this. And what I'm going to do is drag this off to the top. And what I want to modify is going to be several factors. So right now, all I'm going to do is come in here and say, well, this is going to be site 30.255.30.1. I'm just making the changes as if I was entering them in the system. This is going to be site 30. The SD-WAN Advanced Lab stays. The vBond identity stays. All I'm going to do now is take a look at the VPN 0 configurations because obviously they're going to change. So from VPN 0, our first interface is going to be gigabit 0, 0, and gigabit 0, 0 is actually going to have the IP address of 100.100.100.30, and Gigabit Ethernet 1 is actually going to have the IP address of 2.14/30. And I need to modify the gateway of last resort that's being used as for the MPLS environment, which is going to be 13. Remember, the MPLS device actually has the lower of the range. This is the upper, so .13 is going to be the gateway of last resort. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit update. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the three buttons here, and I'm going to say I want to attach a device to this resource, and I said 6CD because I actually picked the fourth one in the list instead of the second. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this. We'll talk about how to verify things later as we're going to have a very long conversation about templates in another video. And then what we'll do is we'll start using those. But let's see what ends up happening here. This is going to be interesting because it says done and scheduled. And if I look at the down arrow, notice it says template BR30 vEdge 1 is scheduled to be attached to the device when the device comes online. Now, the device is not online. If I go to my main dashboard, what we're going to find is that I only have the two resources, DCVE1 and DCVE2, in our environment. And what I want to do is I want to make certain that I can add this third one. Now, in order to be able to add this third device, which is going to be the vEdge 30, what I want to do is I want to take, again, another look at the ZTP server. So what we see now is that it's still telling me that the serial number is not present. Now, we want to modify that. Now, in order to modify that, what I've got to do is I've got to tell the vBond about the serial number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Devices. I'm going to hit the button for Device Model twice. That'll put the vEdges at the top. And I need this guy right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to double click on this chassis number. I'm going to copy it. And what I want to do is I'm going to go back into the ZTP server. So I'm going to exit out of this device. And I'm going to connect to the ZTP server, which is going to be 101. Admin. And what I want to do is I need to know what this ZTP server knows about. So anything that's been configured on the ZTP server can actually be seen using ZTP entries as the keyword. And what this is telling me is this zero-touch provisioning server doesn't know anything about any resources that are part of my fabric. Now, what I need to do is I need to actually add those resources. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say request device add chassis, and I'm going to paste that chassis number in. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to provide a serial number. Well, the naming is a little bit odd, but the serial number is actually this token field. So again, I'm going to go ahead and right-click on that, and I'm going to copy that out. And what I'll do is I'll put that token field in to here. paste. Now I'm not done yet, because what I'm going to do next is I'm going to come over here and specify the validity, which is going to be valid. I have a choice of valid and invalid. And then I'm going to specify my vBond. The vBond is going to be located, and you can just tab complete to figure these out. The vBond.micronixlab.com, and now I'm going to enter the organizational name, which is going to be SD-WAN ADV Lab. If I was going to enter a root certificate, I could. And also I have the capability of being able to specify a default directory to find the root certificate, that sdwan.pem file. I'm not going to worry about any of that. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And you'll notice it comes over and tells me that the database has been updated. Notice that it's coming up and saying the personality, it's saying peer device. We have a new state. What we're seeing here is the device is actually being added to the infrastructure. So from this vEdge, let's go ahead and say show control connections and see if we see something. And we do. Notice we see what we saw before. We see the 100.100.100.3, which is a communication to vBond1. And we're also seeing communication to vMange 2. We're going to see here that the resources are being configured. And ultimately, what I should see is this device go online. And let's go ahead and take a look and see what's actually happening. Show control connections. We still don't have any yet, but we just have to wait. So I'm just going to be quiet. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to watch it from the perspective of the jump box. It's actually been signed. And what we're going to find here is that template that we configured will ultimately be applied to this device. That's what's taking so long right now. So let's go back to the vEdge. And it took its configuration from the template. So if I come over now and I say show control connections, and we take a look at it, we see everything that I would expect to see. 2 vSmart connections, 1 vBond connection, which is a temporary connection, and we have the vManage connection, and notice it's going to vManage 12. So interestingly enough, what we've done is we've walked through the stuff necessary to be able to onboard the ZTP server. We've also configured the device such that it can communicate to the ZTP server, as well as took a look at some of the diagnostic tools that we have with regard to being able to monitor what's happening with the zero-touch provisioning server. Understand also that these commands can also be run, or the command as far as the vdebug, monitoring the file vdebug, can actually be run on a regular vBond. Very, very handy tool if you're trying to determine what's going on or what's going wrong in your network infrastructure. So I just wanted to make certain that we had an opportunity to walk through this, and what we're going to do is we are going to verify that we actually see everything up, and then what we'll do is we'll move forward. So from the perspective of the Cisco vManage, I'm going to go to my main dashboard, and from my main dashboard, what I want to do is I want to make certain that we have 3 functional WAN edges, we have 3 vSmarts, 2 vBonds, and 3 vManage. I hope you found this helpful. I hope you found it informative. What we're going to end up doing next is we're going to turn our attention towards the idea of the C edges. The Cisco devices are a little bit different, and what I'm decided to do is I'm going to go ahead and stop this video here, and then when we return in the next episode, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk us through how we go through the process of onboarding C edges themselves. And I also want to, in that video, talk about templates a little bit more. There are 2 types of templates. There's a CLI template, which is what I demonstrated, and then there's a more versatile form of the template known as a feature template or device template that's made of feature templates. It'll make sense when we talk about it. A lot of people, myself included, aren't real big fans of this type of template because it's a little bit more complex to create, but it does ultimately give us a lot of granular capability when it comes to implementing our fabric and also being able to just simply copy an existing set of feature templates, modify them in kind, and deploy them. So what we're ultimately going to do is we're going to move to feature templates everywhere, but the CLI templates are extremely easy to use. And a lot of students ask me, well, why would I use feature over CLI? And obviously the answer to that question is that feature templates are going to be more granular and also require us to have little to no real understanding of the syntax that would have to be deployed on different devices. And we'll talk about those in the next video set. So again, I'm Terry Vinson, and I want to thank you guys for your time, and I'll see you in the next episode.